Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Al Ghazali's Refutations of Falsafa. Al Ghazali describes the incoherence of the philosophers as a refutation, a radd of the philosophical movement, and this has contributed to the erroneous assumption that he opposed Aristotelianism and rejected its teachings. His response to Falsafa was far more complex and allowed him to adopt many of its teachings. The philosopher convinced Al Ghazali complains at the beginning of the incoherence that their way of knowing by demonstrative proof, Burhan, is superior to theological knowledge drawn from revelation and its rational interpretation. This conviction led a group among the Muslim philosophers who disregard Islam and who neglect its ritual duties and its religious law, Sharia. In his incoherence, Al Ghazali discusses 20 key teachings of the philosopher and rejects the claim that these teachings are demonstratively proven. In a detailed and intricate philosophical discussion, Al Ghazali aims to show that none of the arguments in favor of these 20 teachings fulfills the high epistemological standard of demonstration, Burhan, that the philosophers have set for themselves. Rather, the arguments supporting these 20 conventions rely upon unproven premises that are accepted only among the philosophers but are not established by reason. By showing that these positions are supported by mere dialectical arguments, Al Ghazali aims to demolish what he regarded was an epistemological hubris on the side of the philosopher. In the incoherence, he wishes to show that the philosopher practice taqleed, meaning they merely repeat these teachings from the founders of their moment without critically examining them. The initial argument of the incoherence focuses on apodoxis and demonstrative character of the arguments refuted therein. While the book also touches on the truth of these teachings, it refutes numerous positions whose truths Al Ghazali acknowledged or which he subscribed to in his later works. In these cases, Al Ghazali wishes to show that while these particular philosophical teachings are sound and true, they are not demonstrated. The ultimate source of the philosopher's knowledge about God's nature, the human soul, or about the heavenly spheres, for instance, are the revelations given to early prophets such as Abraham and Moses, peace being upon them. Their information made it into the books of the ancient philosophers who falsely claimed that they gained these insights by reason alone. Among the 20 discussions of the incoherence, 16 are concerned with positions held in the philosopher's metaphysics, ilahiyat, and 4 with positions that appear in their natural sciences, tabiiyat. The 70th discussion on causality will be analyzed afterwards. The longest and most substantial discussion in the first, which deals with Avicenna's and Al-Farabi's arguments in favor of the world's pre-eternity. Al-Ghazali denies that this position can be demonstratively proven and draws from arguments that were earlier developed by anti-Aristotelian critics such as the Christian John Philoponus, Yahya Nahwi of Alexandria. Philoponus' arguments, most often importantly those that deny the possibility of an infinite number of events in the past, had entered the Arabic discourse on the world's creation earlier during the 9th century, according to Davidson, 1987. At the end of the incoherence, Al Ghazali asks us whether the 20 positions discussed in the book are in conflict with the religious law, Sharia. Most of them are wrong, he says, yet pose no serious problems in terms of religion, where they should be considered innovations, bidah. A small group of positions is considered wrong as well as religiously problematic. There are 3 teachings from Avicenna's philosophy, namely that the world has no beginning in the past and is not created in time, and second, God's knowledge includes only classes of beings, universals, does not extend to individual beings and their circumstances, particulars, and third, that after death the souls of humans will never again return into bodies. In these 3 cases, the teachings of Islam, which are based on revelation, suggest the opposite, Al-Ghazali says, and thus overrule the unfounded claims of the philosopher. What's more, these 3 teachings may mislead the public to disregarding the religious law, Sharia, and are therefore dangerous for society. In his function as a Muslim jurisprudent, Al-Ghazali adds a brief fatwa at the end of his incoherence and declares that everybody who teaches these 3 positions publicly is an unbeliever, kafir, and an apostate from Islam who can be killed. Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali's efforts in dealing with the philosophical movement amount to defining the boundaries of religious tolerance in Islam. Soon after the incoherence, he wrote a similar book about the movement of the Ismailite Shiites known as the Batinites, those who arbitrarily follow an inner meaning in the Quran. Initially, the Ismailite Shiites were supporters of the Fatimid counter caliphate in Cairo and opposed the political and religious authority of the Sunni Caliph in Baghdad and the Seljuk sultans that he installed. During Al Ghazali's lifetime, however, there occurred a schism within the clandestine Ismailite movement. The new propaganda of the Ismailites in Iraq and Iran was now independent from the center in Cairo and developed its own strategies. A key element of their not entirely unsuccessful efforts to persuade people to their camp was their criticism of sense perception and of rational arguments. Al Ghazali was close familiar with the Ismailites' propaganda efforts but did not always have reliable information on their teachings on cosmology and metaphysics. These were deeply influenced by cosmological notions in late antique Gnostic and Neoplatonic literature. What information he got, Al Ghazali seems to have received from the Persian writings of the Ismailite propagandist and philosopher Nasir Khusraw, who died in 1075, who lived a generation earlier in Balkh in Khorasan and in the remote region of the Pamir Mountains. Al Ghazali, however, did not know about the schism within the movement. In his book on the scandals of the esoterics, Fada'i al Batiniya, he looks closely at these teachings that he knew and discusses which of them are merely erroneous and which are unbelief. He assumes wrongly that the Ismailite propagandists teach the existence of two gods. Yet this presentation is not so much a misunderstanding on the side of Al Ghazali, but rather a deliberate misrepresentation based on a long discourse of anti-Ismailite polemics, according to Andani. This assumed dualism and the Ismailites' denial of bodily resurrection in the afterlife leads to the condemnation by Al Ghazali as unbelievers and apostates from Islam. The place of falsafa in Islam. In his attempt to define the boundaries of Islam, Al Ghazali singles out a limited number of teachings that, in his opinion, overstep the borders. In a separate book, The Decisive Criterion for Distinguishing Islam from Clandestine Unbelief, Faisal al Tafriqa Bain al Islam wal Zandaka, he clarifies that only teachings that violate certain fundamental doctrines, usul al aqaid, should be deemed unbelief and apostasy. These doctrines are limited to three: monotheism, Muhammad's prophecy, alayhi salatu wasalam, and the Quranic descriptions of life after death. He stresses that all other teachings, including those that are erroneous or even regarded as religious innovations, should be tolerated. Again, other teachings may be correct. Al Ghazali adds, and despite their philosophical background, for instance, should be accepted by the Muslim community. Each teaching must be judged by itself, and if found sound and in accordance with revelation, should be adopted. This attitude leads to a widespread application of Aristotelian teachings in Al Ghazali's works on Muslim theology and ethics. Al Ghazali's refutations of the philosopher and the Ismailites have a distinctly political component. In both cases, he fears that the followers of these movements, as well as people with only a cursory understanding of them, might believe that they can disregard the religious law. In the case of the Ismailites, there was an additional theological motive. In their religious propaganda, the Ismailites openly challenged the authority of Sunni theology, claiming its religious speculation and its interpretation of scripture is arbitrary. The Sunni theologians submit God's word to judgments that appear to be reasonable, the Ismailites said, yet they are purely capricious, a fact evident from the many disputes among Sunni theologians. No rational argument is more convincing than any of its opposing rational arguments. The Ismailites claimed, since all rational proofs are mutually equivalent, taqafu al-adillah, only the divinely guided word of the Shiite imam conveys certainty. Al Ghazali. In response to this criticism, Al Ghazali introduces the Aristotelian notion of demonstration burhan. Sunni theologians argue among each other, he says, because they are largely unfamiliar with the technique of demonstration. For Al Ghazali, reason, aql, is executed most purely and precisely by formulating arguments that are demonstrative and reach a level where their conclusions are beyond doubt. Al Ghazali wrote in one of his letters to a student that later circulated as an independent epistle, a valid rational demonstration is never wrong. This also implies that the results of these true demonstrations cannot conflict with revelation, since neither reason nor revelation can be considered false. If demonstration proves something that violates the literal meaning of revelation, the scholar must apply interpretation ta'wil to the outward text and read it as a symbol of a deeper truth. There are, for instance, valid demonstrative arguments proving that God cannot have a hand or sit on a throne. These prompt the Muslim scholar to interpret the Quranic passages where these words appear as symbols. The interpretation of passages in Revelation, however, these outward meaning is not disproved by a valid demonstration, is not allowed. Al-Ghazali's rule for reconciling apparent conflicts between reason and the literal meaning of revelation was widely accepted by almost all later Muslim theologians, particularly those with rationalistic tendencies. Ibn Taymiyyah, however, criticized Al-Ghazali's rule from a scripturalist angle. Ibn Taymiyyah rejected Al-Ghazali's implication that in cases of conflict between reason and the revealed text, priority should be given to the former over the latter. He also remarked that Al-Ghazali's own arguments denying the possibility that God sits on a throne, for instance, failed to be demonstrative. Ibn Taymiyyah flatly denied the possibility of a conflict between reason and revelation and maintained that the perception of such a disagreement results from subjecting revelation to the premises that revelation itself does not accept. On the philosopher's side, Averroes accepted Al-Ghazali's rule for reconciling conflicts between reason and the outward meaning of revelation, but he did not agree with his findings on what can and cannot be demonstrated. Averroes composed a refutation of Al-Ghazali's incoherence, which he called the incoherence of the Book of the Incoherence, Tuhafat al-Tuhafat. This work was translated twice into Latin in 1328 and 1526, the later one on the basis of an earlier Hebrew translation of the text. The two Latin translations both have the title Destructio Deconstructionum. The later one is edited in. They were printed numerous times during the 16th century and made Al-Ghazali criticism of Aristotelium known among the Averroists of the Renaissance. The Italian Agostino, who died in 1538, for instance, wrote a Latin commentary to Averroes' book. While accepting the principle that only a valid demonstration allows interpreting the Quran symbolically, Averroes maintained that Aristotle had already demonstrated the pre-eternity of the world, which would elevate it, according to Al-Ghazali's rules, to a philosophical as well as a religious doctrine. Averroes also remarked that there is no passage in the Quran that unambiguously states that the creation of the world in time. Al-Ghazali was clearly aware of this, but assumed that this tenet is established through the consensus ijma of Muslim theologians. While Al-Ghazali condemns the pre-eternity of the world at the end of his Incoherence of the Philosopher, the subject of the world's pre-eternity is no longer raised in his later, more systematic work on the boundaries of Islam, the decisive criterion for distinguishing Islam from clandestine unbelief. Soon after Al-Ghazali had published his two refutations of Falsafa and Ismailism, he left his position at the Nizamiya Madrasa in Baghdad. During this period, he began writing with most Islamic scholars regard his major work, The Revival of the Religious Sciences, Ihya Ulumuddin. The volume in Revival is a comprehensive guide to ethical behavior in the everyday life of Muslims. It is divided into 4 sections, each containing 10 books. The first section deals with ritual practices, ibadat. The second with social customs, adat. The third with those things that led to perdition, muhliqat, and hence should be avoided. And the fourth with those that led to salvation, munjiyat, and should be sought. In the 40 books of the Revival, Al-Ghazali severely criticizes the coveting of worldly matters and reminds his readers that human life is a path toward Judgment Day and the reward or punishment gained through it. Compared with the eternity of the next life, this life is almost insignificant, yet it seals our fate in the world to come. In his autobiography, Al-Ghazali writes that reading Sufi literature made him realize that our theological convictions are by themselves irrelevant for gaining redemption in the afterlife. Not our good beliefs or intentions count. Only our good and virtuous actions will determine our life in the world to come. This insight prompted Al-Ghazali to change his lifestyle and adopt the Sufi path. In the Revival, he composed a book about human actions, Mu'amalat, that wishes to steer clear of any deeper discussions of theological insights, Mukashafat. Rather, it aims to guiding people towards ethical behavior that God will reward in this world and the next. In the Revival, Al-Ghazali attacks his colleagues in Muslim scholarship, questioning their intellectual capacities and independence as well as their commitment to gaining reward in the world to come. This increased moral consciousness brings Al-Ghazali close to Sufi attitudes, which have a profound influence on his subsequent works, such as the Niche of the Lights, Mishkat al-Anwar. These later works also reveal a significant philosophical influence on Al-Ghazali. In the Revival, he teaches ethics that are based on the development of character traits. Khuluq, performing praiseworthy deeds and the effect of praiseworthy character traits that warrant salvation in the next life. He criticized the more traditional concept of Sunni ethics that is limited to compliance with the ordinances of the religious law, Sharia, and following the example of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Traditional Sunni ethics are closely linked to jurisprudence, fiqh, and limit itself, according to Al-Ghazali, to determining and teaching the rules of Sharia. Traditional Sunni jurisprudence are mere scholars of this world, ulama ad-dunya, who cannot guide Muslims on the best way to gain the afterlife. In his own ethics, Al-Ghazali stresses that the Prophet ﷺ and no other teacher should be the one person a Muslim emulates. He supplements this key notion with the concept of disciplining the soul, riyadat al-nafs. At birth, the essence of the human is deficient and ignoble, and only strict efforts and patient treatment can lead it towards developing virtuous character traits. The human soul temperament, for instance, becomes imbalanced through the influence of other people and needs to undergo constant disciplining, riyada, and training, tarbiyah, in order to keep these character traits at equilibrium. Behind this kind of ethics stands the Aristotelian notion of entelechy. Humans have a natural potential to develop rationality and through it acquire virtuous character. Education, literature, religion, and politics should help realizing this potential. Al-Ghazali became acquainted with an ethic that focuses on development of virtuous character traits through the works of Muslim philosophers like Miskawa, who died in 1030, and Muslim scholars like Al-Raghib al-Isfahani, who died in 1025, who strove to make philosophical notions compatible with Muslim religious scholarship. As a result, Al-Ghazali rejected the notion, for instance, that one should try to give up potentially harmful affections like anger or sexual desire. These character traits are part of human nature. Al-Ghazali teaches and cannot be given up. Rather, disciplining the soul means controlling these potentially harmful traits through one's rationality. The human soul has to undergo constant training and needs to be well disciplined, similar to a young horse that needs to be broken in school and treated well. At no point does Al-Ghazali reveal the philosophical origins of his ethics. He himself saw a close connection between the ethics of the philosopher and the Sufi notions of an ascetic and virtuous lifestyle. In his revival, he merges these two ethical traditions to a successful and influential fusion. In his autobiography, Al-Ghazali says that the ethics of the philosopher and that of the Sufis are one and the same. Congruent with this position, that many teachings and arguments of the philosopher are taken from earlier revelations and from the divinely inspired insights of mystics who existed already in pre-Islamic religions. He adds that the philosophers have taken their ethics from the Sufis, meaning the mystics among the earlier religions. Another important field where Al-Ghazali introduced Abyssinian ideas into Asharite Kalam in a way that his tradition eventually adopted them is human psychology and the rational explanation of prophecy. Based on partly mistranslated texts by Aristotle, Abyssinian developed a psychology that assumes the existence of several distinctive faculties of the soul. These faculties are stronger or weaker in individual humans. Prophecy is the combination of three faculties which the prophet has in an extraordinary strong measure. These faculties first allow the prophet to acquire theoretical knowledge instantly without learning, secondly represent this knowledge through symbols and parables as well as divine future events, and thirdly to bring about effects outside of his body such as rain or earthquakes. These three faculties exist in every human in a small measure, a factor from the experience of deja vu, for instance, a phenomenon referred to in the Arabic philosophical tradition as the veridical dream, al-manam as-sadiq. Al-Ghazali adopted these teachings and appropriated them for his own purpose. The existence of the three faculties in human soul that make up prophecy serves for him as an explanation of the higher insights that mystics such as Sufi masters have in comparison to other people. While prophets have strong prophetic faculties and ordinary humans very weak ones, the friends of God, awliya, Sufi masters stand in between these two. They are endowed with inspiration, ilham, which is similar to prophecy and which serves in Al-Ghazali as one of the most important sources of human knowledge. Unlike Avicenna, for whom prophets and maybe also some particularly talented humans, Arifun in his language acquire the same knowledge that philosophers reach through apodictic reasoning. In Al-Ghazali, the prophets and awliya have access to knowledge that is superior to that available solely through reason. Despite the significant philosophical influence on Al-Ghazali's ethics, he maintained in Islamic law, fiqh, the anti-rationalist Asharite position that human rationality is mute with regard to normative judgments about human actions and cannot decide whether an action is good or bad. When humans think they know, for instance, that lying is bad, their judgment is determined by a consideration of their benefits. With regard to the ethical value of our actions, we have a tendency to confuse moral value with benefit. We generally tend to assume that whatever benefits our collective interest is morally good, while whatever harms us collectively is bad. These judgments, however, are ultimately fallacious and cannot be the basis of jurisprudence fiqh. Good actions are those that are rewarded in the afterlife, and bad actions are those that are punished. The kind of connection between human actions and reward or punishment in the afterlife can only be learned from revelation. Muslim jurisprudence is a science that extracts general rules from revelation. Like most religious sciences, it aims at advancing humans' prospect of redemption in the world to come. Therefore, it must be based on the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, while it uses logic and other rational means to extract general rules. Al-Ghazali was one of the first Muslim jurists who introduced the consideration of a public benefit maslaha into Muslim jurisprudence. In addition to developing clear guidance of how to gain redemption in the afterlife, religious law Sharia also aims at creating an environment that allows each individual well-being and the pursuit of a virtuous and pious lifestyle. Al-Ghazali argues that when God revealed divine law Sharia, he did so with the purpose maqsad of advancing human benefits in this world and the next. Al-Ghazali identified 5 essential components for well-being in this world: religion, life, intellect, offspring, and property. Whatever products these five necessities, al-zaruriyat al-khamsa, is considered public benefit, maslaha, and should be advanced, while whatever harms them should be avoided. The jurisprudent faqih should aim at safeguarding these five necessities in his legal judgments. And recommending this, al-Ghazali practically implies that a maslaha mursala, a public benefit that is not mentioned in the revealed text, is considered a valid source of legislation. Cosmology in the revival of the religious sciences. Causality in al-Ghazali. Occasionalism versus secondary causality. 17th discussion of the incoherence will be discussed in the next part, inshallah.